Hey everyone, thank you so much for tuning in today. I'm going to be making a breakdown on how I typically color grade my documentaries. I made a video earlier this year on my overall process, which I'll link in the description below. Let's jump right in. So the documentary that I'm going to be coloring today is my most recent work, which is called Horizon.
Wildfire burning in Central Oregon continues to grow tonight, and so do the evacuation zones.
The smoke.
If you haven't watched the full film yet, I'll be linking that down below in the description as well. Just a little forewarning before we start, you should have some basic knowledge on how color grading works, especially within DaVinci Resolve if you're going to follow along with today's video. Okay, so now we're in the color page of DaVinci, and you can see here we've got our 6 shots. I took a still frame of the final grade just to give you a better idea of where we're going to start and where we're going to try to hopefully end. I'm going to try my best to get the same look going off the top of my head, but anytime I color grade a documentary, it's going to be a little different from the last time just because of, human error. So just keep that in mind. But yeah, so before we start anything, I'm just going to take you through the project settings that I use to make sure that the preview that I see within DaVinci is fairly consistent with the export. Now, just a disclaimer, I'm not a professional colorist by any means. There's probably going to be people out there saying that I'm doing this wrong, but this is the system that I use that works for me. So first things first, going down here in the bottom right on our settings, let's go under color management. I work within a DaVinci YRGB color science with the timeline color space being Rec 709 and output color space being Rec 709A. Now over here in the preferences under general, I make sure I have use 10-bit precision in viewers if available checked, as well as use Mac display color profiles for viewers. That's pretty much it. Now we're ready to jump in. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to be taking this footage, which comes from a Sony FX3 camera, and we're going to convert that into a DaVinci wide gamut color science. So we're going to search up color space, transform, and we're going to drag that onto our first node. So because we're working with a Sony camera, I'm going to be using the Sony S-Gamut Cine and S-Log3, and I'm going to be converting that into DaVinci wide gamut and DaVinci intermediate. Okay, so I'm just going to name this color space transform. I'm going to create a few more nodes and then one more at the end of our tree. And what we're going to want to do with this end one is we're just going to want to copy the color space transform and paste it on there, and then go into the effects and swap these. So basically what we're doing here is we're taking the S-Log3 footage and we're converting that to DaVinci wide gamut, and then all of the work that we do with the coloring is going to be within the DaVinci wide gamut color science, which is going to give us a much broader spectrum of colors to work with to be able to fine tune our image how we like. And by the end of it, we just want the image to go back to S-Log3, and I'm going to show you why. So myself personally, I use a number of methods when I color grade films. But typically speaking, I either use the film emulation that's found within DaVinci or phantom LUTs. Today we're going to be using phantom LUTs. Now if you don't know what those are, they're essentially a Rec 709 conversion LUT, but the color science is intended to mimic RE cameras. Now I personally really like how they look, and it gives me a really strong foundation to start with my color grading. Okay, so I just named that node LUT, and what we're going to do is go into our LUTs, and go down to Phantom LUTs. And they have a number of LUTs that you can choose from. Typically speaking, I like to start with Utopia. So I'm just going to drag that on. And now we have our foundation. So you can see if I disable all of these at once, this is what we started with, and now we are here. So before we do any adjustments, let's just quickly watch through the video. So it looks pretty good right off the bat, but I already know there's a few things that I'm going to want to change. My process will always follow these 3 changes before anything else, in this order exactly: exposure, white balance, and then contrast. So when it comes to exposure, our shot doesn't look that bad. It's not severely under or overexposed, so I'm just going to leave that for the time being. Moving on to white balance, to me, just looking at this image, it looks a little bit cool. So what I'm going to do is I'm just gonna ever so slightly bump the warmth. Let's just do a before and after. That's a little bit more in line with what I was imagining. And now let's move on to the contrast. So with contrast, I'm going to be working with the curves, and we're just going to place 3 plots on our chart here. And I'm going to start with bringing down the blacks a bit. Now, as I'm doing this, I'm just watching my scopes, and I'm making sure that I'm not crushing my blacks, but I'm bringing them as close to 0 as I can. I like where that's sitting. I'm just going to bring it down a hair more. All right, the blacks don't look too bad, but I do want a little bit more contrast, so I'm just going to push the mids a bit. Great, that's a bit better. And I'm just going to pull down the highlights ever so slightly. That's our before, and that's our after. Okay, so the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm just going to add a parallel node. So how I'm going to do that is I'm going to add a regular node, right-click it, and hit Add Parallel. Now here, I'm going to name this one Primaries. So I named that Primaries, and I'm just going to name this one Mask. Okay, so just looking at this image, right off the bat, I can tell that I want a little bit more density within the colors. So density is found within the color slice tool. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to start pushing a little bit more density within the yellows and the greens. You can see what that's doing. It's just bringing a little bit more density within those green tones in the background. It's good. Let's push that a bit more. Great. Okay, so I like what that is doing with the greens and the yellows. Right away, I can already tell that I'm going to want to push a little bit more into the reds here. Now, just be careful with the color slice tool, because if I look at this, you can see where we're going to be affecting in the image, and there's quite a bit of noise within the reds because it's mixed with the skin tones. So if you pull one of these too far, you're going to start creating quite a bit of banding within the skin. You can see all of that noise. So what I like to do typically is, and if I'm bringing up the reds, somewhere about there, I'm going to want to bring up the skin tones as well, just ever so slightly to prevent banding. Awesome. I'm just going to pull back the saturation on the skin a bit. And that's the before, and that's the after. So all we're doing is just adding a little bit more darkness and richness into some of these colors. Perfect. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to take this node that I've made called Mask. I'm going to go over to the Power Windows tab, select the circular mask, and just create a small mask around Christian's face. And go over the HDR tab and just lift it up ever so slightly. That's just going to create a little bit of a pop around his face, which is naturally where your audience's eyes are going to attract to. Great. So I think I'm just going to come back into the primaries and just push a little bit more density overall into the image. So maybe about there. It's before and that's after. Great. I'm just going to come back to the white balance tab and just warm it up a little bit more as well. There we go. Okay, so I like how the image is looking so far, but I think I just want to create a little bit more separation between Christian and the rest of the frame. So how I'm going to do that is I'm going to hit this mask node and hit Option P to just create 2 more parallel nodes. And in this first one, I'm going to create a larger mask around Christian and soften that quite a bit. And I'm going to invert that mask. So you can see it's just affecting everything outside of Christian. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to bring down the exposure of the rest of the image to create a little bit of a subtle vignette around Christian. It's a little bit too aggressive. I'm just going to pull that back a little bit. There we go. Okay, so now that we've added that mask, which pushes Christian a little bit from the background, I'm just going to exaggerate that by adding another node after the LUT is applied called Vignette. And I'm going to come into the Effects tab, search up Vignette. And I'm just going to apply that to the Vignette node. So that is way too aggressive, but if I hit Shift F, we can just pull the size back quite a bit, right around there, then come to the global blend and just pull that back quite a bit. So that's before, that's after. We're just adding a little bit of vignetting around the image, which is going to help separate Christian as well. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to come down here and just bring a little bit of blues into the shadows and just offset that by adding some orange into the highlights. Okay, and I'm just going to come into my white balance node and I'm just going to pull the greens in a bit more with the tint slider. I think the last tweak I'm going to make is I'm just going to warm the image up a little bit more. Let's try that. Awesome. Now I'm just going to, looking at the image now, it looks a little dark. I'm just going to come into the exposure node and I'm just going to bump that ever so slightly. And I'm really happy with how this is looking. So if we do just a little before and after, if we disable all of the tweaks that we made and just leave the phantom LUT, this is what we started with, and this is our final image. Before, after. I'm really happy with how that's looking. So let's move on to the next image. So here we have a drone shot from a Mini 3 Pro. And I'll show you the preview of the final grade within the documentary. That's before and that's after. Okay, so let's set up our node tree for this image. We're going to take this image, which was technically shot within the D Cinelike color profile, but because unfortunately there's no true log profile on the Mini 3 Pro, I'm just going to pretend as if it is and use the closest thing that I have, which is the DJI D Gamut and DJI D Log color space. I'm going to take that and take that back into DaVinci Wide Gamut. The same thing over here. We're going to add another color space transform. Take it from DaVinci Wide Gamut. Now I'm going to teach you a little bit of a secret when it comes to how I color grade my Mini 3 Pro footage. I'm actually going to take this into Sony S-Log now. And the reason I'm doing that is I'm going to take another node that comes right after it, and I'm going to apply the Sony Phantom LUT that I used on the previous image. Now there's going to be a lot of people who probably say this is not how you're supposed to do it, and I'm not recommending this. This is just the workflow that I use and it works quite well for me. Okay, so right off the bat, exposure is not that bad. It's a little dark, so I'm just going to bump that up a little bit. There we go. White balance, it's quite blue, so I'm just going to push some warmth into the image. You can see that's the before and that's the after. And it is quite green as well, so I'm just going to take the tint slider away from the greens. Let's try right around there. So that's before, that's after, just a slight difference. And now we're going to add our contrast. So the blacks are pretty close to being crushed, so I'm not going to push those too much further, but I am going to bring a bit more contrast into the mids. You can see what I'm doing there on the scopes. I'm just pulling it up a bit. So that's the before, and then that's after. So already this image is looking way better than what we started with. This was before, now this is after. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to add my parallel nodes. And what I'm going to want to do is, the focus on this image is the river in the middle as well as this bridge. So I'm going to want to exaggerate that a little bit with a mask. So I'm going to come in and use a power windows again and just select that center of the image and feather it out quite a bit. From there, I'm just going to raise the exposure. Let's try around there. And that's much better. So let's just play through that. That's looking good. But when I look at this image, the right side of the screen is a little distracting to me just because we have a little bit more light leaking through on this side. So I'm going to go to this next parallel node. I'm going to add a gradient node. So if I hit Shift H, you can see what this is doing. It's adding a gradient from wherever I started from. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull that to this side of the image and feather that out to about there. I'm just going to darken that a bit. Maybe a bit more. Let me pull that forward a bit more. That's before and that's after. Okay, so now our eyes are going to naturally gravitate towards the center of the image a bit more. Awesome. I think the last thing that I'm going to do is I'm just going to add a vignette node and add some more vignetting to the image. So if I hit Shift F, that is quite aggressive. So let's pull that back and pull back the blend as well. So that's before and that's after. So let's just look at all the adjustments that we've made so far. So this is our current look, and this was before with just the Phantom LUT installed. So you can see we've made quite a bit of a difference. I'm fairly happy with how that looks, so I'm going to move on to the next one. So working with our next frame here, we have a shot of Jordan running into one of the aid stations. So I went ahead and created our regular node tree here. Let me just disable the vignette. So this is what it looks like with just a Phantom LUT enabled. It looks pretty good. I'll show you what the final grade of the documentary looks like. So this is Phantom LUT, and this is the final grade. Okay, so right off the bat, just looking at the image, it's fairly well exposed. The white balance looks all right. So I'm just going to go into the contrast and start pushing some more contrast into the image. Let's pull down the blacks. Let's raise the mids. Before, after. Let's pull down those highlights. I'm already liking the look of that a lot better. I think what I might want to do is actually come back into the exposure and go into the HDR tab and just raise the exposure a little bit. And then add a bit more contrast. Nice. So looking at this image overall, it looks fairly balanced, but I do want to push a little bit more warmth into the image because this was shot during sunset. So I want to give a bit more of that warmth orangey vibe. So let's push some warmth into the image. Nice. That's before and that's after. Now I'm just going to pull a bit of green back into the image by pushing this tint slider to the left. Now the image overall is looking pretty good, but I think like our original image with Christian, I'm going to want to push a little bit more density into the scene. So I'm going to go over to my primaries tab, go over to the color slice. I'm going to start with the greens in the background here. I'm gonna really want to darken those quite a bit. So the greens and the yellows, before and after. And I think I want to desaturate them a little bit more too. So let's pull that down quite a bit. Let's pull the greens down as well. Nice. I'm actually going to push that a little bit more. That's before and that's after. And I think I want a little bit more density within the reds and the skin as well. So I'm going to go over to the skin, push that in. So that's before and this is after. And like I mentioned, I'm going to match that with the reds a little bit to prevent banding. So that's before and after. I might even push the skin a little bit more to about there. Maybe just desaturate that a little bit. So that's before all of our color density, and that's after. So already that's looking a lot better. Now to isolate Jordan a little bit from the background, you can see there's some people here, and we want the focus of the image to be on Jordan. I'm going to go over to the vignette and add that back. That's already looking pretty good. I'm just going to make it a bit more aggressive. So that's before and that's after. So now the focus is on Jordan a lot more. Okay, so I'm liking the look of this image. There's not much else I would change. I think I might just add a little bit more color contrast into the image by pushing some coolness into the shadows and some warmth into the highlights. That's before and that's after. Before, after. It's a subtle change, but you really want to be subtle when it comes to color grading. Okay, I'm liking that. I think I'm just going to add a little bit more contrast into the mids. Before, after. Nice. So let's look at what we started with. So this was our base, which was the phantom LUT, and this is after all of our adjustments. Nice. I'm really liking how that looks, so let's move on to the next frame. All right, so now that I've given you an idea of kind of how my thought process works when I'm color grading, I'm just gonna fly through these next shots so you can get a before and after look at how I color grade these. Okay, so this is our image with the base phantom LUT. This is our final grade within the documentary. So we're just gonna try to achieve a similar look. Right off the bat, white balance looks good. So does exposure, so I'm going to go into my contrast. Start pushing some more contrast into the image. That's looking a lot better already. Just going to bring that down a bit more. Actually, that's a bit too much. Let's go back. Okay, that looks pretty good. Now looking at this image, it does look a little bit magenta, so I'm just going to go into the white balance and pull the tint slider towards the greens. It's before and that's after. Very subtle change. Okay, so I'm just going to work in the primaries node now. I'm going to adjust some of these colors. So let's push some density into those greens and yellows. Let's desaturate them a little bit as well. That's better. That's before, that's after. Okay, I'm going to do the same to the sky. I'm just going to bring a bit more density into the colors of the sky. It's before, that's after. All right, I'm pretty happy with how this looks. Let's do a quick little before and after. So this was the phantom LUT, and this is with our adjustments. Just very basic adjustments, but a little goes a long way when you're coloring. Okay, so this is another interview session with Jordan. This is just with the phantom LUT applied. It already looks really good, but we're going to try to get this a little bit closer to this image here. So this is just the base LUT, and this is the look that we created. Okay, so looking at this image here, the highlights are fairly bright here, and they're kind of distracting away from Jordan. So I'm just going to come into the exposure tab, go to the HDR, and just bring down the light to about there. So that's before and that's after. Just kind of muting those highlights a little bit and bringing them closer to the 896 level. Great. Now white balance, it looks fairly balanced. I'd say I want it to be a little bit more green, so I'm just going to come into the tint and pull the tint slider a bit more towards the green. That's before and that's after. Great. Contrast levels look fairly good here. I might just add a very subtle amount of contrast, but you can see on our scopes, like we've already got quite a bit of dynamic range within this image. Before, after. Okay, so now looking at the colors, I'm going to want to add some density to those greens. So let's go to our color slice and push quite a bit of density into our greens and our yellows. Mute those a bit. So that's before and that's after. Okay, let's just play this video through. Okay, so the image looks good overall. I would say Jordan has gotten a little bit dark now that we've added contrast. So what I'm going to do to separate him from the background a bit is go to our mask node and add a window just around Jordan's body. Just bring down the size a bit and increase the softness. Now I'm just going to raise the exposure of Jordan quite a bit here, maybe to about 35. That's before, that's after. We're just letting Jordan pop from the background a little bit more here. Awesome. Now, looking at this image, I'm pretty happy with it. I think I want to add a little bit more color contrast. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come down to our color contrast node here and just push a bit more blues into the shadows and maybe a bit of orange into the highlights. Let's just pull a bit more that way. Okay. I'm liking the look of this a lot more now. So this is before color contrast, and this is after. I think the final thing I'm going to do is just add a vignette. And now this is our final image. So this was before all of our adjustments, and this is after. Awesome. Now we're moving on to our last frame of the day. This is another drone shot that we took out in Oregon when we were there for the 100-mile event. So this is the goal. So this was before, and this is the final grade in the doc. So this is the image with just the phantom LUT over top of it. Right off the bat, I think we're going to need quite a bit more contrast. So I'm just going to come into the curves here and add quite a bit more punchiness to that image. That's before and that's after. It's looking a little bright too, so I'm just going to go into the HDR range under the exposure node and just pull that down quite a bit. It's before and that's after. Now I want to bring down those highlights a little because they're quite bright. So I'm just going to come onto the light area, just do a before, after. There we go. I think we could honestly push a bit more contrast into this image, so I'm just going to bring the blacks a bit closer to 0. Nice. So this is before contrast, and that's after. So the image looks pretty good. We just made some contrast and exposure adjustments, but it still feels a little blue. This is supposed to be in Oregon, and Oregon is quite, at least this area of Oregon is quite deserty. So let's make this a bit warmer. So let's come into our temperature slider, just bring that in. So that's before, that's after. It's good. I'm just going to make it a bit more magenta by sliding the tint. It's a little bit too much. Let's go back. Okay, so this is before our white balance adjustments. This is after. It's looking pretty good. I think I just want the mids to pop a little bit more, so I'm going to come into the contrast, just push those a bit more. Let's pull that down. It's good. I'm just going to bring down the exposure now to about there. Nice. I still think we can warm it up a little bit, so I'm just going to push the temperature to 200. And I'm really liking the look of the shot. So let's look at the before and after. So this is before, and this is after. Before, after. Okay guys, that concludes our color grading session together for today. I hope you guys learned something, and if you did, be sure to leave a like and subscribe, as I'll be posting more breakdown content when it comes to my filmmaking journey. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.